McLaren scored its first win of 2024 already by dropping a surprise mid-January reveal weeks before we all expected to see anything in launch season. And although the only thing we've seen of the MCL38 itself is the livery, there's actually a lot of new information and some speculation you need to know about McLaren, which has ambitions of fighting Red Bull more closely this year. The orange and black colour scheme, apparently that's papaya and anthracite, is a very familiar look even with the addition of slightly annoyingly hard to read chrome numbers. But we're expecting a clear evolution in car design when the real thing finally breaks cover. That will be on February 14th before we see it in the flesh at pre-season testing in Bahrain on February 21st. So while we have to wait a while to see the MCL38 proper, there's still plenty that McLaren's told us in getting the jump on everyone else in launch season, symbolically, but also in some of the detail of its development work. At last year's launch, new team principal Andrea Stella wanted to front up to the problems McLaren had faced in its development of its 2023 car, and make it clear it had low expectations for the start of the season. So it didn't have a problem putting the real thing on display at the launch because it wasn't very happy with what it had. Now things are different. McLaren's carried the momentum of a massive 2023 turnaround into the winter and is in much better shape than it was 12 months ago, as our man Ben Anderson found when he got to witness this surprise sort of launch in person.
From here on the ground at MTC, you can definitely sense a very different vibe to 12 months ago. They're not expecting the start of 2024 to be a write-off like the start of 2023 was. This is a McLaren that's back in business, feeling more confident. We had half an hour talking to Zak Brown and Andrea Stella here at the MTC about the season to come. They're not giving too much away, obviously, at this stage, but they definitely feel like they're in a much better place than they were last year.
While McLaren's clearly keen to start shouting about 2024 and sounds pretty bullish, it's not going to be as open with the car visually now it finally has something worth hiding. But in terms of details, we've got more than a few clues. During 2023, McLaren put a huge amount of time and money into overhauling the car's aerodynamic platform, but it wasn't able to make as much progress as it needed with core items like its suspension configuration. So suspension, along with further aero development, how the car uses its tyres, and judging the best ride height compromise is a key 2024 priority. McLaren's target has been to maintain the steep development curve that meant two major upgrade packages brought massive gains last year, and McLaren has seen a steady linear rate of progress with no sign of diminishing returns. This further underlines how much better McLaren's position is than the winter of 2022-2023, when its development would improve, plateau, and then improve again. In addition to unconvincing development numbers, a lack of competitive bold ideas was also pinpointed by Stella as a clear weakness prior to his early 2023 reshuffle of the technical department. Now McLaren keeps generating good ideas in every area. Stella says there's also still more steam in the tank in terms of McLaren's development options, and already has ideas lined up for early in the season to replicate those big 2023 steps. This will include a longer term attempt to tone down the peaky car that caught out the drivers in the latter part of 2023. Lando Norris was particularly hard on himself with his rate of qualifying mistakes, but McLaren says its analysis has confirmed a theory that the car upgrades may have introduced a more difficult characteristic. Some rivals thought McLaren had just found some cheap quick lap time by copying Red Bull as best as it could, but would then bump up against a ceiling without a proper understanding of where to derive more performance from. That doesn't sound like it's happening yet. One of the things this era of McLaren leadership has put far in the rearview mirror is blaming older infrastructure for its shortcomings. We were used to hearing CEO Zak Brown, Stella's predecessor Andreas Seidel, and ex-technical director James Key talk about the ageing Toyota wind tunnel and how McLaren desperately needed its new in-house tunnel and simulator that kept getting delayed. All eyes were on 2025 or 2026 in that regime, but Stella changed the narrative in 2023 when he made it clear McLaren should be doing better with what it already had. He felt McLaren was a little disjointed in how elements of the team interacted, and to make it more effective, he needed to pull everything back together, with an emphasis on high quality ideas and a faster turnaround from conception to the track. It sounds simple enough, but it's hard to achieve in reality as F1 technical organisations are massive and complicated. That's what makes it so easy to hide behind excuses like infrastructure. But Stella's changes were backed up emphatically by the unprecedented in-season progress, at least in modern times, that the team made through the year. And guess what? The old infrastructure was nowhere near the disadvantage it was once made to sound like, and now the new technical team has overseen the genesis of the 2024 car, giving it a better foundation. Plus, McLaren finally has its shiny new infrastructure as well. The 2024 car has been developed exclusively in the new wind tunnel since September, components are being produced in the new composite manufacturing area, and ideas are being tested on the new simulator. This car has been benefiting for months from better experiments, more and more accurate data, more efficient research, development and production processes, and this will all apply to its development through the season too. McLaren can't count on the singular genius of an Adrian Newey type, so effectively the team has tried to split what one man leads for Red Bull into 3 distinct component parts. Peter Prodromou, who used to troubleshoot aerodynamic problems on Newey McLarens in the late 90s and early 2000s, was rehired from Red Bull almost a decade ago and now leads McLaren's in-season aero development. David Sanchez, chief architect of the 2022 Ferrari that initially set the pace in F1's new ground effect era, will take charge of McLaren's overall car concept, paying particular attention to 2025 and the major rule change coming for 2026. Ex-Red Bull man Rob Marshall brings a wealth of engineering experience with him from F1's best team, and will take charge of turning the ideas dreamed up by the departments led by Prodromou and Sanchez into reality. The new arrivals began working for McLaren on January the 2nd, and although that's far too late for them to have had any major input into the genesis of McLaren's 2024 car, Stella says they are already contributing development ideas. And the encouraging thing for McLaren is that Stella says their prior knowledge fits with the direction McLaren is already moving in. So rather than these guys coming in and saying, no, sorry, you've got it all wrong, you need to do it like this, they are adding to the solid foundation McLaren is already building. Stella describes it as quite refreshing that McLaren is already broadly following the right path in terms of its processes, and calls the technical conversations these new recruits have begun having with existing McLaren staff fascinating. But the biggest win here for McLaren is having a technical team that can work on short, medium and long-term projects in parallel without one project overpowering the others. Having established himself as one of the top 5 drivers on the grid, Norris has naturally become hot property on F1's driver market. Red Bull's been linked with a move for Norris regularly through his F1 career. Norris is under contract until the end of 2025, but you can never rule out the possibility of another team turning his head and making a play to buy him out. McLaren moved quickly to tie Oscar Piastri down until the end of 2026 amid his sensational rookie campaign, so the team has at least one driver under contract for the first season of F1's new rules. But McLaren Racing CEO Zak Brown regards striking a fresh deal with Norris as a high priority in 2024. Brown says McLaren are talking to Norris on a continuous basis as they try to keep in place what Brown clearly feels is a key component of McLaren's push to get back to the front of the grid. After last year's turnaround, and now that Stella's revamped technical lineup is in place and McLaren's new simulation tools and wind tunnel are operational, Norris will be able to stress test the pledges that have been made to him over recent seasons about why McLaren is the team he should stick with. But at the same time, Norris also has room for improvement in McLaren's eyes, particularly in cutting out the driving errors that spoiled his qualifying record in 2023. Stella points to Max Verstappen's incredible consistency as something both McLaren drivers should be aiming to emulate in 2024 as their top priority. McLaren's painting a rosy picture of its F1 team at the moment, but it doesn't exist in a bubble. Before Christmas, the McLaren Group confirmed its main shareholder, the Sovereign Bank of Bahrain, had taken back full control of the business and given it a fresh cash injection. The group's financial situation has been precarious ever since the COVID-19 pandemic basically stalled the automotive industry and the supercar market in particular. McLaren's car business went from propping up an ailing F1 team that had been underachieving for the best part of a decade to needing to save itself. After the pandemic hit, McLaren had to go cap in hand to various investors, even selling equity in its headquarters in an effort to stay afloat long enough to rebuild what was a thriving specialist business pre-pandemic. The group recapitalisation announced in December is a key part of the plan to help the automotive company and may potentially pave the way for it to link up with another manufacturer. But the F1 team doesn't have to worry about that because it's in arguably its strongest health ever. Brown insists what's happening with the wider business has no ramifications for the F1 team, which he describes as fiscally very healthy, no doubt helped by F1's cost cap reining back in-season spending significantly compared to the recent past. McLaren has announced new agreements with long-time Mercedes sponsor Monster Energy and Ferrari sponsor Estrella Galicia, the Spanish brewery that previously sponsored McLaren when Carlos Sainz drove for the team. Brown revealed McLaren actually turned a profit in 2023 for the first time in quite some time, and says his F1 team anticipates continuing to do so regardless of whatever might be happening with the financing of the wider McLaren business. The only reasonable conclusion to all this is that McLaren's in its strongest shape for over a decade. That's why McLaren has Red Bull in its sights, but beating the world champion is going to be very tough. Stella has even warned that Red Bull should make a large step forward for the start of 2024. Its RB19 was the class of the 2023 field by a big margin, mainly on Sundays, even though it did not have a prolific amount of development through the season. Red Bull was managing the toughest aerodynamic testing restrictions of any team last year after winning the 2022 title, and it also had further restrictions imposed as part of its penalty for breaking the budget cap in 2021. Stella reckons Red Bull kept developing the RB19 but just chose not to turn that into physical parts to save money, and instead it's going to unleash all its improvements on its 2024 car. Brown admits that could be an unpleasant surprise for all of us if that's the case, and it would certainly be a big test of McLaren's clear 2024 optimism.